Okay, so next up we have Adam Harding, and he is going to be speaking from Leeds Conservatoire, and he's talking about improving assignment feedback, integrating assessment criteria. So over to you, Adam.
Lovely, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Just hitting the from beginning button. So hopefully when PowerPoint catches up with itself, you should start to see my slides and live subtitles at the bottom, courtesy of PowerPoint Online. Is that happening for everyone?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Excellent, fantastic. I'll get going. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present this morning. As Phil has mentioned, I'm here to talk about how we improved our assignment feedback process by integrating assessment criteria in a fairly novel way, but I'm hopeful that you are able to take some of the content from this and maybe think about it if you find it beneficial in some way of applying it in your own area. So to give you some context about Leeds Conservatoire, we were formerly known as Leeds College of Music until very recently. We are a tiny little specialist creative arts institution in the north of England. We have approximately 1,600 students in total. So we are very, very small, but dedicated creative arts. So we've got degrees that encompass all of music, whether it's jazz, folk, production, classical, pop, etc., music business, as well as more recently acting musician, and musical theatre pathways. There is a practical emphasis throughout all the courses, and we have quite a centralised degree structure. So all of the degrees that we offer follow a very similar structure. All non-performance based assignments that students complete are submitted online, either directly through uploading files or through an e-portfolio system, and all summative assignment feedback is provided online as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what led to this project. Why did we undertake the work that we did? And basically our NSS, the famous benchmark satisfaction rates for assessment and feedback, were poor. There was a lot of student feedback surrounding the lack of parity in terms of use of language, particularly evident when students were comparing their feedback for an assignment between each other. So one person may have received a certain mark and the member of staff has used the term good. Another person receives a much lower mark, but also has the term good in there. There were queries surrounding the subjectivity versus objectivity of assessment feedback as well. There was some additional feedback about learning outcomes and criteria, not necessarily being evident in the feedback, and students also wanted greater clarity over how marks and feedback were reached. This is kind of made a little bit more complex because creative arts arguably is objective as an industry, and although we had robust frameworks in place to ensure that feedback was as subjective as possible, we just needed to make this clearer to students. And there was also a desire to address this and create that sort of more refined process and enable greater summative assessment feedback for our students. So here are our NSS assessment and feedback scores, satisfaction rates pre-project. So in 2012 and 2013, you can see we're hovering around the mid 50%. 2014 was a particularly bad year, that was 49%. And then it jumped up a little bit to the 60 and low 70%. And for reference, the benchmark of the NSS satisfaction rate was 75.3%. So we had some work to do. So what did we do? Well, we tightened the rules on nomenclature and grades. So we started to really get specific about if you're going to use these particular terminology in your feedback, in your written feedback or other types of feedback, then these are the grades that go alongside that, so that students had consistency across both all of their individual assignment submissions, but also across students and pathways as well. We also undertook a development project. So we have a custom assignment brief plugin for Moodle that pulls all of the information for an assignment into one dedicated place that students can look at. And we decided to expand this to include refined assessment criteria throughout levels 3 to level 6. So we wrote comprehensive assessment criteria that could be applied per year across all of the pathways. And then academic staff could select and modify those assessment criteria directly within the site assignment brief itself. This then automatically syncs with the feedback form that staff are writing against in Moodle. So all of the criteria and the modifications they select are the criteria that staff are going to end up providing feedback against. And I'll show you some screenshots in a minute that will hopefully back that up. So what did we end up with? We ended up with the related assessment criteria being very clearly displayed directly within the assignment brief alongside all the other information that students needed for their assignments. The staff adaptations of assessment criteria meant that feedback was more specific and more relevant, and students also received more comprehensive and purposeful feedback, which was really beneficial. So here's some examples of the staff criteria and feedback views to hopefully provide a bit more context. So on the left-hand side, we've got an example of the criteria editing. This is inside our assignment brief plugin, and staff can select the relevant area of feedback. So in this case, we're looking at a music production assignment. So students are being marked on their production. And then inside each of the scope, they can either hide entire categories of scope. So in this case, they're not capturing any material. So all of that has been hidden. And then they can hide individual scope points inside each of these areas of the assessment criteria. Then on the right hand side, all of those changes sync through to the feedback form, and as you can see, we've got a dedicated feedback area for arrangement of material, which is just one of the areas of scope that students are being marked on for this assignment. So they will have a box that they have to complete against each of the selected criteria inside their summative assessment feedback form. And then all of that is rendered at the point of downloading into a PDF that students download. So here is some example feedback for arrangement of material specifically. So we've got really precise feedback about those exact learning criteria points against the student's submission for an assignment. So what happened after all of this development? Did it actually improve anything? Did it change anything? So we released the feedback system across all assignments as soon as we felt it was ready. Which meant we needed to do lots of staff training on the new systems and the new process and procedure. And following that rapid release, we had to make some quite quick usability improvements. So various people support the building of feedback for a student. The academic staff are obviously providing the marks and the feedback, but some professional service staff are also supporting whether there are any penalties, etc., etc. And we needed to make it clearer for everyone involved in that process what parts of that assessment feedback they needed to edit and change. The new format for feedback was not without reservations and challenges. So when we first released this, staff initially were quite optimistic and went, yeah, great, we're going to choose all of these different relevant assessment criteria, chuck it all in, and then realised that they had to provide feedback about 20 different things inside their assessment criteria, which meant that the staff time to provide feedback went up. And for our part-time academic staff, that was a particular challenge. And of course, we took a system that we'd built in-house and released it across 300-ish assignments. So we started to encounter some bugs as well. But we released this in 2018. And looking at our NSS results from 2012 to 2020 on assessment and feedback, you can see a 10% increase in student satisfaction relevant to feedback. So it made quite a significant difference. And since then as well, it's been hovering around there. So we jumped from 71% in 2017 to 81% in 2018 and 2019, and then 83% in 2020. So the system, alongside our other changes, such as tightening the nomenclature around feedback, has made a massive, massive difference. The other thing that started happening was staff started to use alternate feedback mediums. So it was really interesting to hear that other people have been experimenting with audio and screencast feedback. We've been doing the same thing, but we wanted to make sure that these types of feedback were consistent with this structure of feedback that we were providing through this development project. So staff using the alternative feedback mediums, so audio and video feedback, had to follow the same criteria-led structure. So they had to also give feedback against the specific structure they had selected inside their assignment brief. So what did we learn from this project?
2 minutes left, Adam.
Great. I'm going to be dead on time, hopefully. What did we learn? Don't release something like this across all assignments straight away. Maybe do some testing and gather some feedback on the system first in 1 or 2 localized areas before just going, here's a system, everyone use it. That was a little bit crazy, but we got through it. And as you can see from the NSS satisfaction rates, things seem to improve quite significantly. Following the year 1, where academic staff were selecting a lot of criteria and then spending more time marking it, academic staff then really refined and focused their chosen assessment criteria, which made it even clearer to students what they needed to do to achieve their desired mark, and basically really tightened up the assessment criteria directly against the assignment tasks that students had to do. And the consistency and parity that we got from this system led to better results in our satisfaction and generally just better summative assignment feedback for all the students. And that is the end of my presentation. So I don't know if we do have the time for questions right now, but I'm happy to jump in the chat if not.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, we do have time for questions.
Right.
Nick or Steve? Nick, have you noticed any questions for Adam?
Yeah, there was just one, and it was just for a clarification. The feedback system, is it integrated with Moodle, or is it part of Turnitin, or is it a parallel standalone system?
So it's integrated with Moodle. We're quite fortunate to have a little development team who were able to integrate. They'd already built a custom assignment brief plugin, and then they took the feedback options within Moodle and expanded it to link with that assignment brief and the assessment criteria. So it's directly integrated inside the Moodle grading system.
Okay, and I have a question, if I
Go
may.
for it.
Did you find that you were getting more students sort of looking at and using their feedback after you made that change?
I don't have any data to back that up. Anecdotally, I think so, yes, because it was much more targeted. So students were able to look at those specific points in their assessment criteria and find more detailed information about where areas of their practice could be improved. So taking that as an example, because they had potentially feedback against their capture and their mixing and let's say their mastering all separately, it's quite easy for them now to see, okay, my capture needs work, but actually my mixing I got better feedback on. So having that kind of subdivision in feedback was definitely something I think the students have found more beneficial.
Okay, that sounds good. Have we got time for another question?
If you have any more questions, yeah, we've got time for one more, yes.
Okay. So Louise Naylor has asked that staff workload seems to be a recurrent theme in the queries that have come through. Do you or does anyone else have tips about how to improve assessment feedback without necessarily increasing staff burden? So I suppose in your case in particular, how much extra work did it kind of create for you?
Yeah, so I think in that first year it did create extra workload because of, and that was kind of unexpected because I think when the system was released, as I mentioned, people got quite creative with their assessment criteria and selected ones that probably weren't overly relevant to the actual task. But then obviously with that then being pulled through to the feedback they had to complete, it meant that they had more feedback to write because they'd selected wider assessment criteria, which wasn't overly expected from our side, but was just something that we learned from. And in the second year, academic staff certainly adjusted that to make sure their workload was less impacted by the criteria they selected. But the benefit of that was that the criteria that was then chosen was much more targeted towards the exact assignment task. I haven't got any specific tips for improving staff workload. Yeah, certainly for us, I think in the long term, staff have found it better because they have those sort of more refined areas where they're providing feedback. It's a bit more succinct for them to go through rather than just what was previously happening was they were making a generalized comment to try and encompass all the things. Whereas this time they've got areas to focus on.
Okay, so it might be a case of there's an initial increase in workload, but in the long term, it's kind of a benefit to everyone.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Great, thank you so much. It's really nice to have someone from another institution presenting today. So thank you, Adam. And we're hoping to have more of these in the future. I think there's a couple of other questions. If you've got any time, Adam, to jump into the chat, I know everyone would really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you.